made me so emotional. This is just the grip these books had on me, right? Hello, I am back posting after what I think is a year or over a year or just under a year. It's around a year. I haven't posted it in such a long time. 2025 was not a good year for me at all. So posting booktube videos completely took the back burner. I am happy to say that things are much better now, so I'm very happy and excited to record this new video today actually. What I'm going to talk about today is the best and worst books that I read in 2025, and I genuinely could go on about this forever, but I'm going to try and keep it as mid-range short as possible. And yeah, I'd be intrigued to know what your best and worst books were for 2025. But I'm going to just jump straight in. First of all, I'm actually going to say I read 40 books last year, and despite it being one of the worst years of my life, I feel like that was the best reading year that I've had in a long time. I nearly didn't make my book goal, but at the end of the last year, I suddenly came out of a reading slump and read like 3 books in 1 week or something, which just got me to the end. And according to Goodreads, I read in total 17,873 pages. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I reckon about 13,000 of those pages were Brandon Sanderson books. So I'm going to come in strong with this book series and say it's probably one of the, if not the best series of books I have ever read. This series of books, I did start in 2024, but I read the most of them in 2025, and they got me through one of the hardest years of my life, and that is the Stormlight series. Now, I'm going to talk about them as a series because it would be too much to go through them individually because they are such big, chunky books. So the Stormlight series is by Brandon Sanderson, and it's all within the wider cosmere universe. So I'd talked about in previous videos that my goal for the upcoming year, so that would have been last year, was to finish the entire cosmere series. First of all, I'm happy and sad at the same time because it's over, but I have finished all of the cosmere books. But the Stormlight books really, for me, they were the backbone of the entire universe. I just felt a range of emotions. They were absolutely incredible. So what I love about the Stormlight books is that they are these big, thick, chunky fantasy books, right? And they are pure fantasy. They have a long overarching story, but they have multitudes of stories within them with multiple characters. It's just so engrossing, you know. Every time I finished one of the books, I could not wait to read the next one, and it just left me constantly wanting more. If I had to pick a favourite out of all of them, I would probably say it was maybe Words of Radiance or Oathbringer, but overall I loved them all. And the most recent one, Wind and Truth, I feel like got a lot of criticism from people, but again, I loved it, and that summed up the end of the first era of Stormlight perfectly for me. That's just my opinion. I loved it, and the narrative of it was a little bit different to the other 4 books, but I can't complain. What I love about the Stormlight series is that even the smallest characters will get you emotionally attached. So for me, there was a character called Rock. Yeah, he really made me laugh. And even like some of the other characters that are more minor, they just got you in your feelings. And the best part about the Stormlight series is that it could make you cry, because there were times that I absolutely sobbed. And then there were times that I was just laughing my absolute arse off. And then other times I was just infuriated and angry. And I really wanted to run to Reddit, but I didn't want to run to Reddit until I had finished all of the Stormlight books. Personally, I feel like Brandon Sanderson wrote and writes women characters really well. And he also handles complex topics really, really well as well. So there were just so many moments in the books where it just tugged at me, because I felt like I was really relating to what some of the characters were going through with mental health struggles. and it genuinely felt like Brandon Sanderson was inside my brain. For example, there was one quote from a character called Wit, and it's stuck in my brain. This quote is by a character and it carried me, I'm telling you, and I feel emotional even reading the quote now. This character says, "You told me it would get worse." And then he says, "It will, but then it will get better. And then it will get worse again, then better. This is life, and I will not lie by saying that every day will be sunshine. But there will be sunshine again, and that is a very different thing to say. That is truth. I promise you, you will be warm again." And I read those words exactly at the time that I needed to read them. That you will feel warm again. You will feel happiness again. And even when things get hard, things will get better again. And things will get hard again, and you'll be more prepared. So, yeah, I feel like it just made me so emotional. This is just the grip these books had on me, right? If you're a fan of fantasy and you haven't read the books yet, there is just so much to love, specifically about the Stormlight series, but I would say about the Cosmere in general. And you can read the Stormlight series alone and it will not change how you read it. You do not need to read the rest of the Cosmere. There is just so much to read. Like, there's the world building, there's the science and magic, and how science and magic is in, like, the magic systems, how they're intertwined, and he's so clever. And yeah, you just go through heartbreak, you experience love, and the character development. Another book that stuck with me through 2025, as I read it at the beginning of the year last year, the writing was so beautiful. It was called The Human Origins of Beatrice Porter and Other Essential Ghosts. This writing was absolutely stunning, and it was about two sisters whose parents were from Jamaica and Trinidad. They were born and raised in America, and there were so many themes about sexuality, identity, and the relationships that we have with our siblings and with our parents. And a lot of it was told through folklore stories that were passed down from generation to generation, stories from the Caribbean. And the way it was written was really beautiful. It was really insightful. And yeah, I was just really invested in it because it felt so like real and authentic. And it really kind of highlights the struggles that we have with our parents. It doesn't matter where you're from, but I felt like through the lens of, immigration and the stories that they'd passed down from generation to generation, it just made it that more unique and intriguing. Okay, now we're going to go back to the Cosmere and Brandon Sanderson real quick. But again, this is another series because I couldn't talk about all the books individually. We'll just be here forever. But my favourite after Stormlight series of books in the Cosmere that I read was the Mistborn Era 2. I had read Mistborn Era 1 the year before, so I was excited to see what Era 2 brought, and I was really surprised because it had a completely different vibe to Era 1. It felt like it started off with like Wild Wild West vibes. Over time, you see like technology progress and things like that, and it was like the start of the introduction of human technology developing in the Cosmere alongside the magic systems, which I thought was really interesting. But one of my favourite characters of all the Cosmere is in this book called Wayne, and he was making me absolutely laugh my arse off so much. And again, it's going to be a little bit controversial, but I feel like I preferred Era 2 to Era 1. And that says a lot because I loved Era 1, right? It started off a bit like the Wild Wild West. Then it had like detective vibes and working out a mystery. Whereas Era 1 was more like the uprisings and fighting against the oppressive systems, heist vibes. Yeah, it was definitely very, very interesting. We definitely saw more of an introduction of science fiction combined with fantasy in Era 2. And I think that just gets explored more and more as the Cosmere goes on. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Brandon Sanderson secret projects that I read last year. And each was so good in their own unique way. And this is what I love about Brandon Sanderson, right? He can write so distinctly, differently to one another. And I feel like there's a lot of books or a lot of authors that write books in genres, but one book will sound exactly the same as the next. And I find with Brandon Sanderson, he can write tone and he can write themes and he can write characters that sound so distinctly different from one another. And I feel like that isn't necessarily a feature that's appreciated as much, but I definitely appreciate it. One of the secret projects that I loved, it's a Cosmere book that you can read as standalone. It's called Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Now, I know that Brandon Sanderson said he was definitely inspired by the Japanese anime Your Name, and I actually watched that with my housemate last year, and yeah, the similarities are so similar. But he's taken inspiration from it, and it's actually written at the end of the book, but it's at the same time, it's not the same at all. And it was very lovely. I could not tell you where the plot of this book was going at all. There was times where I cried. Again, it was good to read more because we get to explore different powers, magic system, aka investiture, and see another planet or experience another planet in the cosmere. And also the front cover is probably my favourite out of all his books. It's just so beautiful. I recommended this to my housemate to read and she absolutely loved it, but she is a big fan of Japan and Japanese anime. The second secret project that I read was called Tress of the Emerald Sea. Now, again, this is something that Brandon Sanderson has said he was inspired by The Princess Bride. I've never seen The Princess Bride, and I've had people say, "The hell," at that, but I haven't. But this book was so fun. It was really whimsical and it was light-hearted in the narration. The narration is fantastic. It's funny, but it's also really heartfelt. And it was nice to read a book of his that had like a younger woman, girl character in it. Again, you get to go to another planet in the cosmere and explore what their investiture is there. And it kind of like gives you an insight as to where the cosmere is going, what's happening. You get overlapping characters from other places. There's always little Easter eggs to look out for, which I look up afterwards because I don't necessarily always pick it up. But what I love about his books is that there's just hidden things in them all the time. I don't know how he does it, but I loved it. The third secret project book, which is the latest book in the Cosmere and the book which meant that I've finally read all the Cosmere books so far and now have the painstaking weight of the next one, and that's Isles of the Emberdark. Again, this is a secret project that completely jumps off and is different to the other secret projects. It explores another planet, and it really has like a Lost Island vibe to it. This is where we kind of get to explore more of what is happening in the greater universe, but again, you don't need to have read the other books. He's so good like that. You don't need to read the rest of it, but it really helps having that prior knowledge as well. I just think it works both ways. I loved it. And also, we finally get dragons. These dragons haven't been properly introduced as a character in the Cosmere so far. And this time we do. Okay, that's enough of the Cosmere now. So we're going to move on to 1,000 Ships by Natalie Hines. Now, this was a book that was recommended to me by my housemate. And it's from the lens of the women in the Trojan War. So it tells the women's stories. And I just thought it was so beautiful. It was different to any book that I've read in a long time. And it really made me want to read more Greek mythology, which I'm going to do this year. It was so good, and I'm definitely going to read more from this author. I'm thankful for my housemate for recommending this because I think it's really good to read books that you necessarily wouldn't normally read because you never know what's going to surprise you, and this definitely did. And lastly comes a series, again recommended by my housemate, called Ingo. Now, these are technically children's books, but you can read any book whenever you want. At any age, who cares? I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this series, Ingo. It was so lovely. It tells this story about this young girl and her brother and their dad who goes missing at sea, and they go and look for him. And their dad has always passed stories down to them and shared the stories of this world called Ingo, which is under the sea. And when they go and look for him, they discover that this world called Ingo is real. This is set in Cornwall, and it was just really lovely to read like a coastal town type story. And the main character, Sapphire, she's so sassy. She's a dreamer. And you can really tell this in the writing, that she's always in her head all the time. She has to be brought out because she's always thinking. And you can really tell that it's the mentality of a child. But as the books go on, you watch her mature and develop. And it's just really, really lovely. There are just moments that are just so heartwarming. And it's such a great adventure. It was a really nice palate cleanser after reading the Cosmere, which was so complicated and so many Easter eggs. It was nice to read a fantasy book that was emotional but didn't have all those complications. Those were all the books that I loved in 2025, and I have definitely read some lifelong favourites in there and books that I will reread in the future. Now it's time to talk about the books that I read last year that I would never pick up again and I didn't like them. Please forgive me, this is just my opinion. I'm going to start off with this one. It's called Sphinx by T.S. Lerner. So I read this right after I'd read A Thousand Ships by Natalie Hines. I was excited to read another book that had a historical type setting to it. And this one just fell flat to me. It was basically about a guy that works out of Egypt and he measures zones for oil or something along the lines of that. It basically just read like a Dan Brown book, and I used to love Dan Brown books when I was younger, right? I just loved the stories. They got me hooked instantly. But this just fell flat for me, like about a guy that solves a mystery on behalf of his wife. And this mystery that he's investigating has like earth-shattering implications, right? But the main character gave me the creeps. It was a guy, middle-aged guy, and his wife is younger than him, which is whatever. That wasn't the biggest deal for me. But like certain things happened that I won't spoil. But he basically acted like a playboy. Like there were multiple times that he met other women in the books and he was thinking about sleeping with them. It was like, okay, this adds nothing to the plot. It's just a horny old man. So that got a big fat 0 from me. No shade intended. It just wasn't my thing. The plot completely felt flat to me and it just, I don't know. And towards the end of the year, there were a few Kindle Prime books that I read. I cancelled my Kindle Unlimited subscription a while ago because I was reading a lot of physical books. And then I was looking at the Prime books and I thought, oh, let me just try a couple. One of these is by an author that I've actually read quite a lot of. I really liked her series. Her name is Kendra Elliott and she does like FBI/detective novels set in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest in the USA. And I just love the settings of those books and it's a place that I've always wanted to visit. And yeah, some of the characters are so cool and I loved it. But this book that I read called Her First Mistake is another offshoot of one of the characters that we see in another series. And usually you can tell when a character pops up in a book that is going to get their own series. And I knew that this character would. It was another plot that just fell flat for me. And I really struggled with twist in it. And I just thought, okay. And it was the first time I felt a little bit disappointed by one of her books. I was excited by another character from one of the older books visiting. But other than that, yeah, not great. Then I wanted to read another thriller, so I picked up this one from the Prime store. It was called Psychopath Next Door by Mark Edwards. It's completely far-fetched. And I'm sorry, this is just my opinion. It is. I just didn't like the style of writing. It felt like I couldn't distinguish the characters from one another in the style of writing. And it's about like this woman that moves in next door to this family and she starts training this family's daughter to being a serial killer like her. It wasn't for me. I just didn't like the writing. And then towards Christmas, I decided to read a Christmassy bookish type of vibe called Winter Nights at the Bay Bookshop by Jessica Redland. This was another book that got off of the Prime store. And I actually really loved the idea and premise of this one because it was a lovely bookshop setting. The two main characters seemed like really nice people, but unfortunately, I just found this very boring. Yeah, I feel like I just really struggle to read romance at the moment because a lot of it seems really predictable, and I feel like that's not a genre problem as such. It's more of that I've just come off of reading a really long and complicated and in-depth fantasy series. I need my brain to understand that not every set of books is going to be as deep and twisted as the Cosmere, for example. But at the same time, I did find this book boring, but I didn't completely hate it. I just thought that you know how in romance there's always a big fallout and then they get back together. I just felt like the reason for it happening was just a bit meh. Anyway, that was all the books that I loved and disliked in 2025. I kept the dislike a bit shorter than the likes because I think it's nicer to talk about the books that you loved more than the books that you didn't love. I really hope I wasn't too harsh on the dislikes, but at the same time, I like to be honest about my opinions on things, and what I didn't like, someone else might love. And that's the beauty of reading, right? Some of us will love a book, some of us will dislike a book. And so that's nothing against the authors or anything like that. If you stuck to the end, thank you very much. And I hope to see you in another video soon. And I hope you have a fantastic month, year, week, day. Thank you. Bye bye.